Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning for our first webinar this academic year. My name is Marisa Vasquez-Urias. I'm the Associate Director of SEAL, the Community College Equity Assessment Lab, also not formally known, but we still have M2C3, the Minority Male Community College Collaborative, which is also still under the work that we do with the assessment lab. So I'm joined here today with two of our research associates, Stephanie Matthew and Fernando Garcia, who will also be with us in facilitating today's webinar. And before we get started, I wanted to give a shout out to the rest of our SEAL team. So we have our co-directors, Drs. J. Luke Wood and Frank Harris, and also Dr. Angelica Palacios, who also supports the work that we do. Also want to give a shout out to our team. So Vanessa Falcon, Sua Zhang, Melissa Vang. I feel like I'm going down we have such a great team. I'm going through a big old list here. So Nexi Delgado, Anand Gagi, Karan Jan, and then Stephanie Estrada and Jamal Mazik. So I want to definitely acknowledge them this morning. They are a big part of the work that we all do collectively, and also in being able to, to share the work that we do with all of you through our webinars in our series. So next. Okay, so just a reminder, we have our social media if you'd like to follow us. We've got our Twitter handle, our Instagram, and also our Facebook if you'd like to look us up. And then also for today's session, we just also want to invite you to engage with us throughout the session. So this is our Twitter handle and then each of our own individual handles. So if you'd like to post anything or if you have any questions, and please feel free to communicate with us that way. I also want to direct you all to, there's a Q&A function and also I think a chat function on this feature. So I also want to invite you to share any of your questions via those methods as well. So we also want to acknowledge our advisory board members who've also been very supportive of the work that we do and continue to support us here at SEAL, and that we collaborate with in different areas as well. We also want to acknowledge and thank our affiliate partners who also contribute to allowing us to continue the work that we do and to really spread the word of the work around equity and student success, and working together to continue just increasing institutional responsibility in serving the needs of our students. And then lastly, we want to recognize and thank three particular organizations. So the Marcus Foster Education Institute, College Futures Foundation, and RISE for Boys and Men of Color. And we want to thank our colleagues and partners for the generosity in helping to fund our research projects that we work with collaboratively to continue this work and again, increasing equity and student success for underrepresented students and particularly boys and men of color. Sorry about that. We also want to share with you a list of our upcoming webinars. We should have this posted on our website soon, but just briefly, we have two upcoming webinars later on this year. So in October, we've got a webinar that will be hosted or led by Dr. Frank Harris and his research team on the faculty perspectives of culturally relevant teaching strategies for men of color. And then in November, on November 16th, Dr. Wood and his research team will be doing a webinar on informing professional development for instructional faculty in the community college, using insights from the CCIDI, which is the Community College Instructional Development Inventory. And then also we have some dates for our spring topics in February, March, and April. So in February, we'll be doing a webinar on advancing success for Southeast Asian men in community college. In March, we'll be having a webinar on the influences of financial hardship on food and housing insecurities for men in community college. And then In April, we have a webinar on the role of women in supporting men of color. And then some of these other ones that are also going to be led by some of our partners. So Derek Moore and Gerard Pope will be leading us in discussion on leadership development through image and success coaching, so student-athlete program replicable for men of color initiatives. So again, this should be posted on our website soon. If you are jotting down notes, don't worry, it'll be available. We also want to invite you to save the date for our next working group meeting. So we'll be hosting the meeting again here in San Diego next summer. June 8th and 9th are the dates that we have. And we're excited to, that we'll be having our keynote speaker, Dr. Ebony Zamani Galler, who will be here. So shout out to Ebony, she's also a rock star. Okay, so going into today's topic, the experiences of Latino male transfer students. And so just wanted to give you the overview of this research project. So the support for this project is coming from the Center for the Study of Community Colleges, particularly a grant for innovative research on community colleges. So this study is an investigation of Latino male transfer experiences with a particular focus on socialization, masculinity, and identity. And so it's a tri-state investigation, which means I'm working collaboratively with two other colleagues, which I'll share in a moment, from two other states. So we're doing research on California, Texas, and Florida, and collecting data from all three states on Latino male transfer experiences. So in terms of socialization, trying to identify and exploring how and what the different ways that Latino men understand the way that they, in terms of gender role, and what they're supposed to be doing and acting, and how they're supposed to be acting in terms of expectations of society. In terms of masculinity, we are questioning Latino men in terms of the different traits that they perceive as being important for masculine identity for Latino men, and then also identity, just how trying to understand the process in which Latino men come to their understanding of becoming who they are, and looking at the different intersectionalities of their identity as well. So the collaborators for this project are Dr. Sarah Rodriguez from Iowa State University. So she's been collecting data from different institutions throughout Texas. And then my other colleague, Dr. Cristobal Salinas from Florida Atlantic University, who's been collecting data from institutions in Florida. And like I mentioned, myself and our research team here have been collecting data here in California. Okay, so just to give some background and context, for those of you who are on this webinar and who've joined us and continue to follow our work, you know that we are particularly interested in men of color, because in general we find that men of color in general and Latino men enroll in 2-year public institutions at higher rates than at 4-year institutions. And so in addition to that, when in terms of not just enrolling, but I think also facilitating successful outcomes for Latino men, our institutions have continued to struggle in facilitating successful outcomes for them. In terms of the literature, we find that there really is a dearth of published literature on the experiences of Latino men in community colleges. While there are articles and research on Latino men, they are particularly focused on the experiences, their K-12 experiences, and also at the 4-year institutional level, and but less so much on their experiences as community college students. Even more so, there are fewer studies on their experiences as transfer students. So again, there's a great body of literature on transfer student experiences in general. There are some pieces around Latino transfer students, but it's coupling both men and women. And so we've yet to really identify, a strong literature base around the experiences of Latino male transfer students. And that's something that we hope to produce as a result of this research study. In addition, the studies on Latino men and transfer students, we find that there's little focus on socialization and masculine identity within this context. And so as we were thinking about the context for this particular study, this study is really a response to Harris and Harper's 2008 Masculinities Go to Community College, in which they do explore the role of pre-gender socialization experiences of men of color and how that influenced the way that they experienced college at the community college. And so at the end of their article, that was something that they invited scholars to take on for future research, was to explore the experiences of masculine identity and socialization experiences of men of color at four-year institutions. So that's really kind of where this particular research is founded on. And so similar to the framework that was used by Harris and Harper, we too looked to O'Neill's male gender role conflict, which assumes that gender role socialization produces a devaluation of feminine values and a fear of femininity, which produces 6 patterns of conflict and strain amongst men. And you can see the 6 here. So restrictive emotionality, this idea of socialized power, control, and competition, homophobia, restrictive sexual and affectionate behavior, obsession with achievement and success, and healthcare problems. And so I think with the findings, the preliminary analysis that we've been doing, we have found we find that the experiences of our Latino male transfer students do fit into some of these categories, but we also recognize that there's also additional social and cultural nuances that also are interacting with some of these conflicting messages of masculinity that we are looking to further explore. And so, as I mentioned, the study is really 2 parts. It's one looking at like social and masculine identity development, but also the academic success of Latino male transfer students. And so for that, we looked at Wood and Harris's socio-ecological outcomes model, which asserts that men of color begin college with a predisposed perception of college life as determined by background characteristics such as age, generational status, their first-generation college students, native language, and other societal factors such as racial prejudice or economic conditions. And with these predisposed experiences that men come into our institutions, they also interact with other factors within the institutional framework, such as campus ethos, environmental factors, academic factors, and non-cognitive factors. And so that's something, these are the 2 guiding frameworks that we used as we not just collected the data, but as we're beginning our preliminary analysis of the data. Okay, and so from here I'm going to pass it over to both Stephanie and Fernando, who walk us through the research questions, our methodology, and we'll share some of our initial findings for this study.
Thank you, Dr. Vasquez. So to begin the rest of this presentation, we're going to start with our research questions. The research questions that guided this study are: what prior gender socialization experiences do men bring with them as they transition from the community college to the four-year college experience? And secondly, how do masculinities and identity conflicts affect male students' attitudes and behaviors during this transition? For the purpose of this presentation and in presenting our preliminary data, we are going to be focusing on the context of these Latino male students and the experiences that they have been having from pre-college to transferring to where they are now at the four-year university.
And now I'll go ahead and speak a little bit to our methodology that guided our study. So our participants consist of self-identified Latino men who transferred from a community college to a four-year university. The initial goal of this study is to include 45 participants overall, at least 15 from each participating state. And again, those are California, Florida, and Texas. At this point, we've interacted with 33 participants total, 11 of which are from California. When facilitating this study, it begins with having the participant fill out a pre-interview questionnaire with basic demographic information as well as family information. Some of the information that is requested is what college they transfer from, what languages are spoken at home versus at school, their Hispanic Latino origin group, mother and father's highest attained level of education, where their parents were born, family yearly income, campus involvement, current working status, degree aspirations, and career aspirations as well. The study was structured with 2 semi-structured interviews that were approximately an hour long each. We took a phenomenological approach where we truly want to get to the point where we can begin to understand their lived experiences, as well as how they are making meaning of what they have lived through.
And so as part of our preliminary data analysis, we completed a pre-analysis and we reviewed our data. And what that means is during the pre-analysis, we took notes during our data collection, so making notes of observations during the interview of both the participant or any dynamics in particular. Then we summarized the narratives after each interview to kind of get a gist of what the story was presented. And then we reviewed our notes to see what was noticed and making the connections between the observations and our narratives and our narrative summaries. And then we revisited the study purpose and the conceptual framework to make sure that the conversations we were hearing or the stories we were hearing were really aligned with the questions we were asking, and if we needed to tweak them a little bit better or ask other questions, that was really what helped us with that. And then afterwards, we reviewed our data, and what that means is we listened to our audios of these interviews, we read through some transcripts, and we really tried to get a general sense of what the stories were, and we came together as a team. So it was really a collaborative process in trying to understand what are these men telling us, what are their experiences like, and how can we highlight what are these different commonalities, what are the differences, and how can we explain that.
And here we have a nice little snapshot of our participant portfolio profile. Our population from California consisted of transfer students ranging from the age of 21 to 28. The class standing consisted of 70% juniors, 20% seniors, and 10% graduate students. All of our participants were enrolled full-time at their respective four-year university. The languages spoken by all 100% of participants were Spanish and English, usually prefacing Spanish at the home and English while they were at school. There was one student who also spoke German. An interesting data point as well from the population from California was the fact that 64% of students were working part-time, 18% were working full-time, and only 18% of them did not have any type of job. We also noticed a surprising amount of students who have attended more than one community college before transferring. 9% attended 3 community colleges before transferring, and a staggering 73% of our interviewed students attended 2 community colleges before transferring. 63% of the participants interviewed identified as the first in their family to attend college and a university. And it was also very exciting to note for us that of all the participants that we interviewed, over half of them have degree aspirations of attaining at least a Juris Doctorate or a doctoral degree during their lives, which is just, again, really exciting to see that these students want to continue their education. They want to go as far as they possibly can. So while we were doing our initial analysis of the data that's been collected, we started noticing this higher education trajectory, as we labeled it, that started to present among this population of students. Their higher education path usually consisted of a first entry point to community college, where there was a feeling of not really knowing exactly how to navigate the system, and a sense of being uncomfortable trying to do so. We then noticed something that we are calling for now the upside down world, where problems with not really having a plan, issues with mental health, and a lack of guidance contributed to students leaving higher education and temporarily placing a pause on their studies. Fortunately, their stories continued with a sense of resiliency, and in every example where students had to discontinue their schooling, they always returned with the help of some critical people and critical moments in their lives, which we'll be discussing very shortly. All of the students then moved to one of the most critical points in their life, and that was the eventual transfer to a California four-year university. Finally, our participants all discussed their postgraduate goals, as well as their motivations to continue in education or their specific careers.
So from looking at this trajectory, there were 3 main themes that came up in terms of all of these experiences of these Latino male transfer students. So there was a first entry point into community college. So what's this? There was mental health, invisible barriers, and support systems, the important people. So for the first entry, this was a point where a lot of people, like Fernando mentioned, was the males described not just really knowing what to do, and also with 63% of them being first gen, was them trying to figure out, what should I do with my life? I actually don't know what to do. And you could see that resonated here with the quotes. yeah, I think that was most of it. And then I was working and I was making what I thought was decent money for an 18-year-old. And I just thought, hey, I'm making some money and I'm having fun with my money. So I think I'd rather steer towards working more hours and doing this rather than wasting my time on something that I didn't find as fun or something that wasn't benefiting me at the moment. Another student says, I dropped out of community college after my first 2 years. I dropped out because I was lost. After talking to a counselor, I was actually disappointed because she was pretty much telling me, you haven't taken any classes that you need. All these things that I have no idea that I've been doing wrong. I felt like I was wasting my time and my money, so I decided to just stop going to school and that I was just going to start working.
And the next theme that really presented itself throughout some of these interviews was the idea of mental health or invisible barriers that are impacting some of these students. Studies have shown that traditionally Latino men don't feel the most comfortable going to seek out services around issues of mental health, just because that's something that they're not really told about while they're growing up, that there are services and that these things exist to try to help you throughout that process. As evidenced by some of these quotes, mental health was a really big thing for a lot of the students that we interviewed. One of the first students mentioned, personally, very few people know that I went through this. I actually went through depression, like really hard. It was to the point where I kind of said my goodbyes to people and I almost became, well, I did become suicidal. Another student said, what I mean, I guess I'm going to overshare, pornography addictions and lustful thoughts and stuff. Something's happening with me. I don't feel comfortable even at the Catholic Center, which normally I would feel way comfortable. It's shameful to me. I have to deal with that. I was overwhelmed with guilt, just feeling dirty, all the stuff that comes with it, feeling dirty and guilty and not worthy of anything. Finally, another student shared, I didn't try to attempt, but I take medications. To me, that's serious. So I did have to take still do. Yeah, I did take some medication. It was bad. To me, it was bad. I'd be at work and I'd have to go in to the back and just cry, then come back and just suck it up. And yeah, to me, it was pretty bad. Going back to the middle quote, with that specific individual, he was really conflicted with his religion and the messages he had gotten from that avenue growing up. He was a very devout Catholic. So when he was feeling this sense of contradiction with his religion, now in the moment, he doesn't really know how to move forward from that and where to go from there. And going back to this point of Latino men not really feeling comfortable going and talking about what they're experiencing and what they're feeling. A lot of these students that we're taking direct quotes from mentioned to us right before they told us some of these things that this was the first time they've told somebody about it. This is the first time they've ever really conceptualized this to another person, that this is what I'm feeling and this is how it impacts my life, which is so sad to hear that some of these students are carrying such a heavy weight. But again, they don't feel or they don't know that there's services and opportunities available to try to help them get through that they don't have to suffer through these things by themselves. And that's definitely something we try to bring up in the interview as well. Definitely refer them to resources on campus to make their experience a little bit better.
All right, and then last but not least, we identified some support systems that students talked about. So some critical people that really helped them move along their community college experience and during any challenges that they felt. So you can see this quote here. It wasn't until I went to Light College and I met a mentor. Her name was Myra. She was the one. She didn't give up on me. She was in charge of it's called Made Guardian Scholars. She was a great mentor and she was someone who really made me stay focused. She's really motherly to everybody. She's like that naturally with everybody. She was really nurturing. I can cry in front of her and I'd be okay with it. Nobody likes to cry in front of people. She was really loving too, really loving. Every time I would talk to her, I felt like she really cared. She really wanted to help me. To me, that's something really important. Another student says, one quote that stuck to me from my dad, that to this day, like now, if I ever get down or something's bugging me, he heard me talking. And he was like, what's wrong? And I explained this and that. And he just looked at me and he was like, you have blood in your veins, don't you? I didn't know how to answer it because after that expression, all this, I was like, yeah. He was like, then keep moving. He looked at me like that. He was like, why are you standing there? Then he explained, standing here isn't doing anything for you. The way you feel is just you're stuck. It was him talking to me, and that's when I started running more. So here, some other emerging categories that have presented itself that we're still continuing to explore are postgraduate goals. So students have talked about wanting to continue with graduate school, as Fernando mentioned before, and going so far as to getting a master's, getting a PhD, getting their JD. And it really shows the different ways that they've also explored those opportunities by seeking like internships, fellowships, and which shows and demonstrates their commitment to their education and wanting to pursue school later.
And another really big emerging category that came up with the majority of our interviews was the motivation of where they decided to go to school. Family tended to be the biggest determining factor as to why students chose their university. And it was very much so because they wanted to stay with their family. They wanted to be close. They almost felt a responsibility to their family and making sure that they were still close enough to be able to react and be able to show up whenever their family needed them. Again, that was just something that came up very, very often, which is interesting because when we would then probe a little bit and ask if they looked at any other universities or if they were interested in attending somewhere away from home, there was a little bit of a longing or a want to try to see or try to understand what that experience would have been like. But very quickly it would get shut down back to, but I couldn't, I needed to stay here. I couldn't go too far from my family. I always needed to be able to respond to situations that were presenting themselves. So that was just really interesting to see that some students are making the conscious decision of choosing their university solely because they still feel such a strong attachment and a responsibility to their family.
Okay, so so as we, like we said, this is just our preliminary analysis and review of some of the qualitative data that we've collected as we continue to continue our interviews with Latino male transfer students. And so I think in doing so, some of the other points that I wanted to also highlight, given what we've shared with you so far, is and which I think refers back to some of those the frameworks. So definitely male gender role conflict and how, as Fernando shared, or Stephanie read the quote about this idea of not crying, in front of counselors or faculty. And so this idea of the stigma of restrictive emotionality has been interestingly in terms of the men who say that it's important to be strong, but there's also this contradiction of not wanting to share emotions. But yet many of them did open up and express during these interviews some very personal challenges and internal barriers or challenges that they were experiencing emotionally, and so which did result in some of them crying, which I think for them, like Fernando said, was the first time that they'd ever opened up. And so I think that leads us into kind of this future research around mental health and masculinity, and thinking about how can we explore this intersection of kind of looking at this stigma of that masculine identity of Latino men and kind of being tough and not showing emotions, but yet how is that affecting our students internally and psychologically when they are to a point where they might be considering hurting themselves. And so, and we'll share about that as something for implications for future practice. But and going back to this first point about intersectionality, I think doing this research has allowed us to kind of start thinking about how the importance of exploring the multiple identities of Latino male transfer students, so not just race and gender, but social class and sexuality. In another recent interview that we conducted, one particular participant shared about early conceptions of being a man as a Latino male, and just this, being raised and being told that being homosexual was wrong, and that it wasn't something to be accepted, and even just the intersections with religion, as Fernando had mentioned earlier. And so how these early religious teachings, how those influenced Latino males' perceptions and of homosexuality. And so I think that's another area that's really important and significant when we think about Latino males in general, and not to just look at it from a very heteronormative perspective, but also considering other identities. And then with that, I think this third point really gets to our thoughts about exploring masculinity through this critical feminist perspective. So Hurtado and Sin recently came out with a book, and they talk about this notion of Latino feminist masculinities. And It's this development of a feminist consciousness among men, which is something that's also come up in several of our interviews with participants. Where, and you know, what what we shared with you today was really just part one of the interview, where we talk more with students about their academic experiences. But the second interview that we had with them was really exploring, you know, early understandings and teachings of masculinity, and how that may or how men have made sense of that over time. And so something that's come up repeatedly with men, with our male participants, is that they all start off by sharing these traditional notions of what it means to be a Latino man. So being a protector, being strong, you know, showing like the physical strength as well as the emotional strength. But interestingly, over time, and particularly as men have gone through college, they've all kind of shifted. They've all indicated that they've had a shift in what their understanding and conceptualization of what being a man is. And they really are taking on this different perspective of this feminist perspective of seeing both men and women on an equal playing field. And so it's really challenging. I think it's interesting that I think it goes back and it challenges O'Neill's male gender role conflict. And so they mentioned before, I think it's a great framework, but it also doesn't encompass the various social cultural nuances that may occur within our students and the way that they're experiencing. And part of that is really these Latino male students who are coming into particular an institution that doesn't have the demographics aren't reflective of their own identities, and so they're also kind of trying to assimilate into this institution and trying to, but at the same time they're seeing that this assimilation is really going against some of the early teachings of masculine identity, and so anyway, so that's definitely an area of future research that we are continuing to explore. And with that, another something else that has continuously come up within our findings is the role of women in Latino male success. And in particular, you know, as Stephanie had shared the quote about the student who shared, you know, interacting with a particular counselor. There were others who shared their interactions with a female faculty instructor or a girlfriend or their mothers who were really supportive of them, both academically and personally and psychosocially as well. And so I think this has really prompted us to we're currently doing a concurrent study right now on the role of women in the masculine identity development of Latino men, and also in their in how that identity development has shaped their educational pathway, and particularly as community college students and transfer students. So I think that's just in general, the role of women in male student color, men of color success is an open area, an open opportunity for anyone to continue doing future research on that. So in terms of implications for practice, actually before I come here, I also wanted to touch back on one of this particular point, the trajectory point of the upside down world. You know, today we shared some of the mental health challenges, but I think some of the other challenges that men experienced was working. So as was shared by one of our participants, he'd mentioned that, you know, after dropping out or after being put on academic probation at community college the first 2 years, they went to work and they were working full time. Many of them worked manual labor jobs, either out in the fields or in factories. And, you know, he'd asked, you know, what was that critical moment for you when you decided to come back to school? And many of them said that they found themselves questioning what they were, you know, questioning themselves and questioning whether they wanted to keep doing this for the rest of their life, and recognize that it wasn't something, you know, they weren't in companies that they could move up in. And so they realized that this was not what, especially for those who were first generation in this country, that it wasn't something that their parents had set out for them to do. And so there were a few students who said that they would literally left work, you know, in their work clothes, all dirty and with like grease under their fingers, and went to their local community college and signed up for school. So it was just that moment for them where they realized, like, I can't do this anymore. So I also wanted to mention, because I don't know if they're online, but for the Role of Women study, we're looking to do this as a California-wide study. So we're being supported by our folks on our research team, so Vanessa Falcon, Melissa Vang, and also we have Ray Ramirez, who's at Fresno City College. And so, we want to also explore the experiences of Latino men in the Central Valley here in California, because we recognize that being an agricultural area also does have additional layers to understanding these intersections of Latino male experiences. So just wanted to acknowledge their work too. Okay, so in terms of implications for practice, again, this is all still developing, but as we shared with you, I think there were different points that were significant for these students. And the first one was their first entry. And, many of them talked about, I kind of came in, I didn't know, as we shared with one of them who was taking classes, and apparently these classes weren't going for anything. So, we talk about the importance of intrusive advising, and I like to use the word proactive advising. And, I know there's still so much to explore in terms of what are good practices for counselors and for faculty to make connections with students and helping them explore, and not just limiting them to maybe what we think is important for them, but really probing our students to think about what is it that they want to do, and not having them settle for something that they were coming from that they didn't want to do. So second thing is just mental health. So we were thinking about intentional outreach of mental health services. So, and also maybe creating a space for Latino men to share their narratives of success. So for example, maybe inviting successful Latino male transfer students to campus, or maybe facilitating something with the transfer, where usually it's an EOP office at the local four-year institution, and if there's opportunities to take Latino male students to a four-year university and meet with successful Latino male transfer students at the four-year institution, which also might help with kind of giving that additional message, putting them in a space and environment where they can see themselves in that space as well. So I think, we talked about what do we want to say about mental health, and at first we were like, well, access, is important, but, Fernando really highlighted the importance of this intentional outreach. As we'd mentioned, Latino men are not likely to come and seek mental health support for this idea of a stigma of, I'm not, you're not supposed to share what's going on with you inside, or you're not supposed to tell the family business or your own business to anybody else. And so, and I think as we continue going through this study and talking to our practitioner, our practitioner board, we can probably start thinking about different ways that we can be more inclusive of mental health services and outreach for Latino men, but also just men of color at the campus. And then in terms of transfer, what's interesting is some of these students, they were part of it's called a transfer bridge program here at the university. Not here, but at their institution. And so they talked about, so as transfer students, they went through this general orientation, but then some of them, I think if they were selected for like an EOP program, they had a separate orientation, which was it was smaller, it was more personalized, they mentioned. And so they felt that they didn't learn anything from the big orientation because it was also big and overwhelming. And so I think just thinking about the way that we design our orientations, not just only at our four-year institutions, but one student in particular said, it'd been really cool if we had a transfer bridge like program, but at the community college, so that we can even though we were going to get it twice, I think the idea of sometimes, receiving information more than once, the first time when we get so much information, we might not remember it all, but the second time, it usually tends to sink in. So, one student suggested if there was an opportunity to have kind of this pre-transfer orientation, either by folks at the community college, or bringing representatives from the particular universities to their campus. That way, and and he admitted, he's like, some people might not take it seriously. He's like, but for those of us who are, especially as transfer students, we're older. We know that we're going to transfer. We know that we want to be successful and we have a path. So I think it's important. He mentioned it's important for them to kind of have that repetitive messaging, both prior to transfer and after transfer. Okay. Well, I think that's it. That's all we had to share. I mean, there's so much more to share. There's so much information, but we're conscious of time, and we also wanted to leave it open for